Man, I wish I'd gotten that whole rant towards Marlowe on the recording, but that's okay. Listen, I'm not perfect. So, Marlowe, Bob Marlowe, in the current
Murray.
in the comment section, he sent us this paper yesterday, and
Yes.
we're gonna go through and tell you why this doesn't say what he thinks it says. So, first point, page 7. Let me find it here. Bottom of paragraph 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
He says, I thought it was a good study.
Yeah, we're gonna show you why that's not the case. So, okay. So, for example, using the PCE deflator, inflation rises on average by 106% points during a Democrat presidency, and it falls by 83.83% during a Republican presidency. The difference of almost 2% of inflation. That's a lot of inflation, by the way. Is statistically significant, albeit only, and you might be able to tell me what this means only at the 12% level. I'm not an economist. I have no idea what at the 12% level is referring to, but I don't really think I need to. Difference of 2% inflation between average presidencies. Okay? That is huge. Everyone, tuck that little fact away for later. Okay? All right.
Yeah.
FDR. Now, down here, it talks about if you included FDR, the gap. So I probably should. I'm getting a little bit out of sorts here. I should have prefaced this whole thing by saying this study claims to prove that the economy is better under Democrat presidents, specifically Democrat presidents, not Congress, not president with Congress, specifically under Democrat presidents, by demonstrating with data that the GDP is bigger under Democrats, that unemployment is better under Democrats, and a few other markers. Okay? And they don't go as far back as FDR, but here on this page they say, and if we did include FDR, well, that would actually make the gap bigger because he had this huge 7.4 per annual GDP, and they kind of neglect to mention that that's because he took us off the gold standard, which allowed him to artificially inflate the money supply by an unprecedented amount. So that's a kind of just a nice little omission of important facts there. And if someone omits a fact that's kind of, critical to your understanding of the thing, they have a fucking agenda. All right, let's go down to page 11. Figure 2. Now, here we have a graph demonstrating economic growth throughout presidencies, or throughout presidential terms. Okay, so year 1, you see Republicans start off slow, they build next year, they build a third year, falls off a little bit in the last year. Democrats, it's the opposite. They typically start high for some reason, which we'll get to, stays high next year, and then falls a little bit more. Now, they argue all through here, and oh, nice. That's what that flashlight was. We're getting lightning storm. Sorry, got distracted
Yeah.
by the natural wonders. So they try to tell you that the initial conditions inherited by Democrat presidents are not the reason for the improved outcomes in Democrat presidents' economies. Okay, tuck that fact away. We're gonna get to that one later too. 17. End of paragraph 1. In what follows, we focus on the Hamilton shocks for a simple, pragmatic reason. The sample period is much longer, but the Killian shock sends a similar message. Different oil shocks by party have been an important contributor to the growth gap in Democrat versus Republican average GDPs. Tuck that fact away for later, please. 17 down to 19. Okay. Now, here all the way down on page 19 is the first real big clue that these people that wrote this paper are blowing smoke up your ass. This entire section, I'm going to read it because it's important. E, fiscal policy. We have just seen that defense spending shocks other than the Korean War buildup, which you shouldn't omit that because it's, kind of fucking important, don't explain the DR growth gap, but it would if you included it. What about other sorts of fiscal policy shocks or deliberate systematic fiscal stabilization policy? Panel E of Table 6 shows results using the Romer and Romer measure of tax shocks constructed from the narrative record. They explain none of the Democrat-Republic difference. So far, our analysis of fiscal policy has focused on shocks rather than on systemic differences between Democrat and Republican presidents in their policy reactions to the state of the economy. Limited data makes it, and that's a typo on their part, it needs to be makes, not make. Limited data makes it difficult to estimate even relatively simple policy functions, such as those in Arbach 2012 reliably. However, we offer one simple piece of empirical analysis that suggests little difference between Democrat and Republican predecessors in discretionary fiscal reactions to economic activity. Figure 3 plots the 4-quarter change in the structural surplus as a share of potential GDP for each quarter of each presidential term, starting with the 4th. Now, right here, they say, however, we offer one simple piece of empirical analysis that suggests little difference between Democratic and Republican presidents in discretionary fiscal reactions. Does this graph look like it's not that big of a fucking difference to you, with Republicans being the line that goes up and Democrats being the line that goes consistently down? Does that look like it's not that big of a fucking difference to you? So you know what this graph is. Change in full employment surplus versus lagged GDP growth. Democrats are these plus signs. Republicans are the circles. Measured vertically against the 4-quarter change in real GDP, lagged 1 year, measured horizontally, thus blah, 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 blah. Plus signs in the chart because the structural surplus data begins only in 1960. The data start in the final quarter of Eisenhower's second term. The figure shows regression lines fit separately to observations corresponding to Democratic and Republican presidents. These lines are like rump fiscal reaction functions for the two parties, and the scatter plot suggests no fiscal stabilization at all under Democrat presidents. The scatter plot suggests no fiscal stabilization under Democrat presidents. I repeated it because you need to tuck it away for later. The slope is blah, 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 and a modest amount under Republicans, blah, 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 standard error, blah, blah, blah. Thus, fiscal policy appears to have been somewhat more stabilizing under Republicans, and as we saw back in Table 2, the deficit is generally larger under Republicans. Thus, fiscal policy cannot explain any of the DR growth graph. That is a non sequitur argument. Tuck that away for later. Now, let's see. Page 20. Okay, you got that. Figure 3. Page 23. Bottom of paragraph. Bottom of paragraph 2. Do-do-do. Now. Come on. And as noted earlier, there is a strong case to be made that nominal interest rates rose on average under Democrats but fell under Republicans. Thus, if there was any partisan growth advantage stemming from monetary policy, it would seem to have favored Republicans. Gee, I wonder why. An entire paragraph 4. With these plots as background, panel F of Table 6, which considers the effects of monetary policy shocks in the same regressive framework we have used to consider other shocks, holds no surprise. The first line uses shocks identifiable from the narrative record by Romer, which are available for only a small portion of the sample. The other two monetary policy shocks are computed from SVAR models. The first are the interest rate shocks identified by blah 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 and their Markov switching SVAR. available for the period in years. The second are shocks computed by using a standard, I can't say that name, identification with the federal funds, ordered last in a VAR that also includes real GDP inflation and commodity prices. Non-linearities associated with the zero lower bound for the funds rate. If anything, controlling for monetary policy shocks pushes in the wrong direction. That means towards the Republicans, suggesting a policy-induced growth advantage for Republican presidents. The monetary policy variable with the most explanatory power for the DR growth gap is our own time series on SVAR shocks, which gives Republicans an edge of either 23 or 32 points. Now, you can literally skip down to the bottom after this and get to the conclusion, which is the real telling part. 1, 2, 3, 4. Democrats would probably like to attribute a large portion of the DR growth gap to better fiscal or perhaps monetary policies, but the data does not support such a claim. If anything, and we would not make much of small differences, both fiscal and monetary policy actions seem to be a bit more pro-growth when a Republican is president, even though GDP grows significantly faster under Federal Reserve chairmen appointed by Democrats than by Republicans. That's code for they inflate the money supply by printing more cash. It seems we must look instead to several variables that are less closely tied to U.S. economic policy. Specifically, Democrat presidents have experienced, on average, better oil shocks than Republican presidents. That's oil shortages or hikes in price for various reasons. Specifically, some of which may have been induced by foreign policy. Faster growth or defense spending, if the Korean War is included, and arguably even if it's not, because Obama spent a lot bombing kids in the Middle East. And a better record of productivity shock, which may relate to many different policies, more tenuously, both in terms of sample size and statistical significance. Democratic presidents may have also benefited from stronger growth abroad. These factors together explain up to 56% of the DR growth gap in the full sample and as much as 69% over shorter post-63 samples. The rest remains for now a mystery of the still mostly unexplored continent. And then they do a sign-off. So, now that I've given you all of that from this study, here's what it means. I posited to you yesterday in this stream that I had the theory that a large part of what you were asserting was a rubber band effect from administration to administration. And this study proves exactly that. Republican gets in, and by your own study that you sent me, he enacts better fiscal policy, he enacts better monetary policy, and has more conservative, more sane interest rates. And what happens? The economy starts to grow at a steady but firm pace. Democrat gets in, riding the wave of that growth, starts enacting shit policies, and the economy tapers off. And the cycle repeats and repeats ad nauseum. This study proves that Democrats always come in and fuck up what Republicans fix. That's all it proves. I'll take my applause.
Yep. Also, to further prove what you have said. Back in 2014,
that's right. I haven't even brought up the article that Kate found to further enforce this. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Back in 2014, here it is. The Washington Post, which, as we all know, is a left-leaning paper. They also did an in-depth thing on this study where they basically went through and picked it apart and discovered that, hey, the point that these guys were trying to make with this study, first of all, was incredibly biased, but second, in spite of the fact that it was incredibly biased, did not prove the point that they were trying to make with it.
All right, I'm going to catch up on the comments, and then we're going to read through this article. Is false prophet and has already come, as they are already at an ideological war. I don't think he's already come, but
Nah, he's not here yet.
I don't think he has, but Marxism would certainly be a strong argument for it. Can you believe they made Sauron an incel? I can believe that they did literally anything to Tolkien's work. They're bastards who destroy everything good and wholesome. I honestly dislike the performance charts under U.S. presidents' data only because economic performance can be felt for years after the president has already left office. Exactly, which is exactly why Biden and all of his stooges were trying to take credit for the oil leases that Trump sold because they're disingenuous assholes.
Right.
That's exactly why Bill Clinton did so well after Reagan Bush. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Hey. And I can totally believe that the showrunner of Rings of Power did that. I dislike that argument, Shawshank, because in the same argument, Democrats, you try to and blame previous for their administration's failing and to take credit for when the next Republican president does well and pass it off as their work. Yeah, Bob, the study you sent me proves the opposite of what you just said, so that's funny. Here's something you need to understand, Bob. More GDP growth isn't necessarily a better economy. This is a point I forgot to make during my rant, but here it is. Saying that more GDP growth equals better economy is like saying more growth always better, even if it's cancerous. And that's what GDP growth under Democrats is. It's like giving your child a bunch of meth, and then they're high on meth, they get a bunch of schoolwork done, they do all their chores, they get all this shit done, and then they have a massive meth crash, and you pass them off to the other parent, and you're like, your problem now. And then the other parent says, all right, we're going to get you detoxed off meth, we're going to get you, we're going to teach you some skills to do your chores and your homework without being high on meth, we're going to get you straightened out, and then I'm going to send you back to the other parent in 4 years, and then the cycle repeats. All growth is not good growth. If you pump the economy full of fake dollars that you just print off the money printer at the Federal Reserve to inflate your GDP to look good on paper, that's not good organic growth. It's cancer. And that's why our economy is in the shambles it's in.
Also, padding your numbers with things like astronomical immigration and other things like that.
Got mixed up. Interest rates aren't controlled by the parties. No, they aren't controlled by the parties. They're controlled by the Federal Reserve, the head of which is appointed by someone who is from the parties. And your own study talks about that. Your own study literally said that interest rates are different under Democrat versus Republican appointed heads of the Fed. So you don't have an argument there. No, it does. No, it does not. Look at Figure 2. It shows that Democrats inherit a weaker economy. They inherit a slower growing economy. That's not a weaker economy. What do you want? Do you want something that's big and super inflated but super unstable? Or do you want something that's going to consistently and steadily grow at a measurable, consistent pace? Which one's better? It's literally an opinion piece. Yeah, well, that, as far as I'm concerned, that peer-reviewed study you sent me is an opinion piece. It's absolutely chock full of bias. Interest rates are controlled indirectly by party, by the appointment makes the Fed chair. Exactly, Scata. If he had a good criticism, he'd go through formal process submission and get published. No, the study doesn't. Neither the authors nor the results that way. Democrats literally inherit a worse economy, yet do better. Printing fake dollars wouldn't add to real GDP. Unless you cook the books. And here's the thing. How do you measure real GDP? How do you measure which dollars are fake and getting printed and which ones were already in the economy? You can't keep track of that in any meaningful sense past when they leave the money printer. The head of the current Fed is appointed by Trump. Yeah, and?
Yeah.
Real GDP is inflation-adjusted GDP. Okay. So again,
Yeah.
you're using GDP as the be-all, end-all argument here. And even if real GDP is inflation adjusted, you are still talking about the number of dollars in the U.S. economy as the be-all, end-all measurement. And that is not the be-all, end-all measurement of a good economy. Things like job stability, long-term job growth, unemployment rates being consistent. And that study doesn't demonstrate that any of that is better under Democrats. Again, you think that you have this ironclad study there, you don't. GDP is not the number of money in the economy. It literally is. Gross domestic product is how much money has come into the economy, or how much money the economy. Fuck's sakes, these people.
Well, I mean,
Define GDP. Gross domestic product is a monetary measurement of the market value of all the final goods and services produced and sold, not resold, in a specific time period by countries due to its complex and subjectiveness. So, yeah. So, monetary measure of the market value of all the final goods and services produced and sold. So, yes, it is the total amount of shit actively flowing through the economy. What do you guys think about Rings of Power shipping Galadriel and Sauron and making Sauron in so? I think that the entire show Rings of Power is nothing but an abortion.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, the unemployment rate is better. Could it have anything to do with the... Yes, it is. Could it have anything to do with the increased government spending on military contracting and social programs, creating temporary jobs that don't actually last past their term? Could it have anything to do with that? Gee, I wonder. Is price multiplied by quantity sold?
Well, I was talking about jobs not in government, though.
Bob, price multiplied by quantity sold. So you mean the total number of dollars that go through the economy in a given time period? God, it's like you're talking to a wall.
Well, I mean, he's like, I'm going to over-define, like, completely stretch it out to make it look like what you said is not what you said, even though it's exactly what you said.
That would be money velocity. No. What money velocity? Velocity multiplied by money supply would be... Okay, well now you've just backtracked on yourself, because I said before I looked up the definition that the GDP was the total amount of dollars in the economy. And you just said that the GDP was velocity multiplied by money supply. So which is it? Which is it?
Okay.
Now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like what Sphinx was talking about yesterday.
Yes.
Which, if you come in here, Sphinx, we already sorry.
We are sorry. We should have listened to you.
Yes.
It's a Democratic campaign consultant's dream. A study from two respected academic economists. God, I butchered that one. Economists. Concluding that since the late 1940s, the economy has consistently performed better under Democrat presidents than under Republican ones. The gap is huge from blah, blah, blah. The period that when the White House was roughly split between parties, the economy grew at an average annual rate of 3.33, but growth under Democrat presidents averaged 4.35, and under Republicans, 2.54. Jobs, stocks, and living standards all advanced faster under Dems. Not surprisingly, one of the report's authors is a well-known Democratic economist, Alan Blinder, a former vice chairman of the Fed Reserve, now at Princeton University. The other, Mark Watson, also at Princeton, is a highly regarded scholar of economic statistics who describes himself as nonpartisan. More interesting, Blinder and Watson don't credit the Democratic advantage to superior policies. Democrats would no doubt like to attribute, and then they quote that thing I read. They write, most economists, they note, doubt presidents can control the economy. So if presidents didn't do it, who or what did? Blinder and Watson marched through economic studies. Their conclusion, about half of the Democrats' advantage reflected good luck, favorable outside events, or trends. 3 dominate. And see, this is another thing with your unemployment argument, Bob. I'm well aware of what GDP is. It is more than just the money supply, but you're right in saying that GDP is the amount of dollars spent in a given year. Gravity times. I think GDP equals gravity times speed of light. Have a light and Sauron if it was done right, but nothing about. No, Rings of Power is all trash. All trash.
Yeah. Yep.
But and here's the other thing that I forgot to mention. You talk about unemployment being better under Dems. Well, do you think that maybe an oil shock would have something to do with that? Do you think that maybe the expansion or contraction of the oil industry might be a factor in the jobs that are present during any given time? I wonder. Global oil shocks, steep increases in prices which depressed economic growth, were the largest because they hurt Republicans more than Democrats. They occurred in 73, 79, and Jimmy Carter, but affecting Ronald Reagan, and 2008, George Bush. Statistically, they explain slightly more than a quarter of the Democrat-Republican gap. Productivity, efficiency, was the next largest contributor, but presidents can't magically raise productivity. It reflects too many forces: research, improved schools, better management, entrepreneurs. Although Bill Clinton benefited from an internet boom, he didn't invent the internet. Productivity gains occurred disproportionately under Democrat presidents and accounted for nearly a fifth of the gap, reported Blinder and Watson. Yeah. War was the final factor. Oh, and another thing I forgot to talk about was the fact that under this study that we just showed on screen, they disprove a very, very popular Democrat talking point that Republicans love to waste all of our money on the military-industrial complex when the average spending in a year is 5.2% under Democrats and less than 1% by Republicans. Crazy. Who's the warmongers now?
Right. Also, I think it was kind of funny
thank you for the lurk, Pinky.
Pinky! But I also think it was funny when he said that Bill Clinton didn't invent the internet, and I was like, well, the guy pretending to be his vice president did. As much as the guy who pretended to be his vice president thought he invented the internet, or at least what he told everybody.
God, yeah, fucking Mr. Florida's gonna be underwater by 2011. War was the final factor. Military buildups in the Korean was boosted with growth in the Truman and presidents, Johnson presidencies, respectively. Since the late 1940s, inflation-adjusted defense spending rose 5.9% annually under Democrats and only 0.8% under Republicans. The buildup accounted for about an eighth of the Democratic advantage. As for the rest of the gap, Blinder and Watson say it's a mystery.
A mystery?
Actually, the explanation is staring them in the face. The parties have philosophical differences that affect the economy. To simplify slightly, Democrats focus more on jobs, Republicans more on inflation. What resulted was a cycle in which Democratic presidents tended to preside over expansions, usually worsening inflation, and Republicans suffered recessions, usually dampening inflation. Students of the post-World War II economy know these cycles. The best example include the 1960s Kennedy-Johnson boom, which lowered unemployment to 3.5% in 1969 and raised inflation virtually non-existent in 1960 to almost 6%. This was followed by 2 recessions in the Nixon-Ford years. Under Carter, the economy revived, but inflation spurted to 13% in
Yeah.
1980. Carter's inflation bred the devastating 80 through 82 recession under Reagan. It pushed unemployment to 10.8% in late 1982, but ended double-digit inflation. The implication is clear. If Republican presidents were saddled with most recessions, their growth and job creation records would naturally be worse, and that's what the Blinder-Watson study shows. Since the late 1940s, the economy has spent about 12 years in recession, but 10 of those 12 years occurred under Republican presidents. Only 2 occurred under Democrats. On average, the economy spent slightly more than a year in recession for each Republican term and only 3 months for each Democratic term. The Federal Reserve influencing interest rates and credit conditions was the main agent driving this cycle. The Fed may be independent, but it doesn't ignore the prevailing political and intellectual climate. Its policies have been more permissive under Democratic presidents than Republican ones. There's a large lesson here. The Blinder-Watson study implies that the economy's performance during a president's term is a good test of the soundness of policies. Not so. There's often a long lag between the adoption of policies and their true effects.
Mm-hmm.
Economic policies pleasurable. Economic policies pleasure. Oh, that's a fun word to use for this. Okay. Economic policies pleasurable in the present can be disastrous for the future. Facts, which is Democrats are known for short-term Band-Aid solution policies. For example, the inflationary policies of the 1960s, similarly, the policies that fed the economic booms of the 1990s and the early 2000s, spawned overconfidence that fostered the financial crisis. The reverse also applies. Policies painful in the present can reap long-term dividends, especially when you do it right. The hurtful suppression of double-digit inflation in the 90s is an obvious case. It will be interesting to see whether this study is misrepresented for political gain, obscuring the harder task, finding policies acceptable in the present and beneficial for the future. Now, I'm going to get to the comments because I've been skipping over them. And then once I address any comments about this, we'll hit the end record button.
Yes.
I am well aware of what GDP is. It is more than just the money supply. Okay, so no new comments. So that from you, Bob. That doesn't disagree with anything I'm saying. Yesterday, my entire point was that the president doesn't really matter, but the fact is that the economy did do better under Dems, whether casual or not. I think it's hard to argue that when overall Republicans have better fiscal and monetary policy and a more stable economy, because stability is very, very important when you're talking about something like the economy. You can't say saying more growth equals better is a non-argument as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't hold water with me, sir. I care a lot more about something that's stable and is going to consistently grow. If you tell me I can give you this system, I can give you 2 economies, bruh. Here, you take the red pill and you get an economy that grows at 2% every year consistently with almost no recessions because it stays stable. Or I give you this blue pill, economy will grow like 5% for like 2 years, have a massive recession, grow like 6% the next year, another recession. I'm gonna pick the red pill every fucking time, dude.
And just because you disagree that their fiscal policy is better doesn't mean that it isn't.
Dude, your own study admitted it is. The study that you sent me in this paper, I read it top to bottom, which was very hard, by the way. Your own study says Republicans do fiscal and monetary policy better. So, I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, considering when you're talking to a person who literally, when you present them with the definition of something, is like, well, the definition of what you said is what you said it is, but it's not. But it is. But it isn't. Is not necessarily a valid person to argue with.
Yeah, I'm a wolf arguing with a donkey.
Yes.
So we are going to wrap this video on the economy up. Democrat policies suck shit because they cause unstable, hyper-reactionary economies. They've benefited from historical events, and they're also warmongers who spend a fuck ton on the military and then point to Republicans and say, look at the warmongers over there.
Right, yeah.
Hashtag Trump 2024. Peace out.
Exactly.
Welcome to the adventure.